Hello again, and thank you for joining us for Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, hazardous weather graphics showing no advisories, no watches, or warnings over all of interior Alaska from the Arctic coast, northern Bering Sea, down to the North Gulf Coast. Panhandle, same thing, no watches, advisories, or warnings out there, as well as out over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. So moving on into satellite imagery, you can see out to the west there, just north of the AKwx area, low pressure pulling off to the northwest, and the front kind of stalled out there just west of the Perbolofs, extending down across the eastern Aleutians and weakening as the progression of the photos roll on there. You can see getting more holes, kind of a more shredded look than it did earlier on. And then down south of Kodiak Island, actually well to the south there, low pressure pulling westward, and some bands of moisture spreading some variable clouds across Kodiak Island, but no precipitation at the state airport there. And right off the coast, though, is the precipitation producing band of clouds, and then some variable clouds swinging into the North Gulf Coast, and a little bit of moisture earlier on over the eastern North Gulf Coast. Yakutat picking about a third of an inch of rain, but that ended. Dry day this afternoon. Dry over the Panhandle, especially in the south, with some sunshine over there and a few clouds up to the north. But basically a dry afternoon, or it was a dry afternoon across just about all of the Panhandle. And some light snow, Copper River Basin, on up into north side of the Alaska Range, actually up to Eagle, anywhere from 1 to 2 inches of snow falling there. And upper level low over the northern interior, keeping it mostly cloudy with some areas of light snow, nothing amounting to too much there, generally less than an inch or even less than a half inch. Some areas not seeing anything at all, but some flurries. And same thing along the Arctic coast. On the chart, you can see that weakening front there over the eastern Aleutians, bringing a little bit of moisture and clouds there. And just grazing the Perbolov Islands, seeing southeast winds 20 to 30 miles an hour there, temperatures in the upper 30s, mid to upper 30s, both St. Paul and St. George. And rain and snow showers over the central and western Aleutians, becoming mostly snow showers out towards Shimia today, with the colder air wrapping back around, coming down from the northwest there. Otherwise, not too bad over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Winds not too bad, a little gusty along the coast there, but skies mostly clear to partly cloudy for the most part, and extending into the Kuskokwim Valley. Low clouds and fog, Cook Inlet, with some increasing mid-level clouds here this afternoon, with that moisture trying to push in from the east there. There was a little bit of snow. That was mostly due to the fallout from the fog, though. Brought about 100th of an inch water equivalent at Anchorage International Airport today. And again, not much moisture at all reaching Kodiak, but there's that band just right off the coast there. It'll move in this evening, overnight tonight. And then over the Copper River Basin, some light snow, about up to an inch falling around the Copper Center, Glenelg, and Gulkana areas there. Delta Junction had maybe 1 to 2 inches of snow, some light snow, and up to a half inch or an inch falling at Eagle. And those were the heavier amounts that I saw associated with that trough there over the eastern interior. Otherwise, just light snow, flurries, snow showers over the northern half of the state all the way to the Arctic coast. And again, a lot of dry conditions for the Panhandle. And the main low centers staying well to the south there, that 973 millibar low, barely affecting Kodiak Island, really just spreading some mid and high level clouds in during the day today. And for tonight, definitely some rain and snow will spread into the east side of Kodiak Island to a lesser extent and towards Shelikof Strait. Later tonight, some snow showers may push into the Bristol Bay area, but they'll be pretty light. And with that low center out over the Bering Sea pulling northwestward, continuing its northwestward track, that's going to hold that front in place, but it'll continue to weaken, but still could see some rain and snow showers over the eastern Aleutians, but not the Pribilofs. Easterly flow will keep that moisture to the west of you. just some clouds, and should see a little bit of a diminishing in the winds there, and temperatures in the lower 30s, may drop below freezing possibly. Dry over the northern Bering Sea with continued winds 15 to 30 miles an hour along the Yukon Delta coast, Nunivak Island, on up towards St. Lawrence Island. And then upper level low pressure keeps it cloudy with areas of light snow flurries, snow showers over the northern interior to the Arctic coast. And then it looks like some moisture, a chance of snow moves again, looks like possibly moving westward across Cook Inlet tonight in the Kenai Peninsula, as well as the Susitna and Manuska Valley. But that kind of letting up, ending over the Copper River Basin areas with some clearing along the eastern North Gulf Coast. Maybe some increasing clouds over the southern panhandle with maybe a little bit of moisture working into Dixon Entrance with that trough farther to the south. And then for tomorrow, that's pretty much done. That moves off to the west there and back to the mostly sunny skies for the southeast coast, dry conditions and light northeast winds or north to northeast winds. And for the day on Monday, Copper River Basin, partly to mostly sunny, areas of possible low clouds or fog with light snow and a weak trough over the central interior along and south of the Yukon River into the Yukon Flats, and possibly Eagle, again, some snow showers, maybe into Fairbanks, areas of light snow or flurries mostly with fog trapped underneath that high pressure area over the north slope in the Arctic coast. A little bit tightening of a gradient there over the Yukon Delta. Probably pick the winds up northeast or east-northeast, 15 to 25 miles an hour with some light snow showers. And a cold front spreads snow into the western Aleutian areas with that low center pulled back to just east of the Russian coast there, far southwestern Bering Sea. Well, that weakens into a trough on Tuesday as low pressure moves into or just southwest of Cape Neuenham there. So pick up the winds in the Bering Strait and the northern Bering Sea, as well as the Yukon Delta, with areas of light snow along that trough swinging up again along the Yukon River, tapering off over the flats. Some clearing over the Brooks Range North Slope, maybe some flurries over the northern North Slope and the central Arctic coast. A couple of weak troughs will bring some clouds and rain along the coast, chance of rain or rain and snow showers over the inside waters there, but winds will pick up out of the north through Lincoln Island Glacier Bay areas up to 25 knots. It'll tend to keep it drier there. Chance of rain or snow showers North Gulf Coast. Chance of rain or snow for the southern coast of the Kenai Peninsula. Lows tonight, mid-20s to mid-30s for the Panhandle, right around zero, Copper River Basin, but 10 to 20 below in the Kuskokwim Valley, and anywhere from 0 to 15 above south central Alaska, near 30 for the Kodiak area. Highs tomorrow, possibly into the lower 30s for Bristol Bay, Dillingham lower around 21, and 5 below to 10 above for the Kuskokwim Valley, 0 to 10 for the Copper River Basin, lower to mid-20s south central Alaska, the Panhandle in the 30s to lower 40s. Lows staying above freezing for Kodiak Island, warmer low temperatures south central Alaska, but still below zero in the Copper River Basin and Kuskokwim Valley, and 20 to 30 for Bristol Bay, and lower 20s northern Panhandle, lower 30s to the south, and then highs upper 20s, lower 30s northern Panhandle with that colder northerly winds blowing in. Otherwise, lower 40s to the south near zero in the Copper River Basin. Up to the north, lows 15 to 25 below, followed by highs 0 to 15 below, and followed by lows again 10 to 20 below with highs right around zero. Some areas staying below, especially the north slope and the Arctic coast. Lows in the 20s for the Pribilofs and portions of the Aleutians, followed by highs in the upper 20s to mid-30s, lows in the lower 20s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on into flying weather for Monday morning, IFR for the North Slope Arctic coast, on down into the northeast interior, and then some just north of the mid-Yukon River Valley area, into the southern Kobuk Valley, and marginal VFR southward to the Alaska Range, except extending further south right to the North Gulf Coast with some scattered IFR. VFR, northern Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley, into part of the Kuskokwim Valley, and then down over the southwest interior. Marginal VFR for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, but VFR, St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait, and the Panhandle. Good VFR. And again, Yakutat and the southeast coast, looking at pretty good VFR conditions into the afternoon. So marginal VFR creeping into the central and south coastal areas. and also some areas of VFR with areas of marginal VFR across southern Alaska, and a little bit of IFR up over the Yukon Flats, and IFR eastern Arctic coast and into the central North Slope. The conditions, St. Lawrence Island, Nunivak Island, the southwest coast, Chukchi Sea, good VFR there. Marginal VFR continues for the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Some IFR there on the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, mostly marginal for Kodiak Island. And then for Tuesday morning, VFR for the southeast coast on up into the eastern half of the Copper River Basin. Otherwise, marginal VFR, Prince William Sound, western Copper River Basin, southern Cook Inlet, in toward the western Alaska Range, Bristol Bay marginal, lower Yukon River Valley marginal VFR, but Yukon Delta Coast, St. Lawrence Island, into the Bering Strait, Noatak Valley, good VFR, with a narrow band of IFR, St. Matthew Island, extending south eastward there between the Pribilofs and Nunivak Island, extending all the way down to the north coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, the Bering Sea and Aleutians, not much change. And that holds into Tuesday as well. Looks like that IFR zone will creep southward into the Pribilof Islands, a hold elsewhere. VFR, northern Bering Sea, west coastal areas into much of the central interior with some marginal VFR as well, especially along the Yukon River. And south of the Alaska Range, marginal VFR conditions with some IFR for western Prince William Sound, possibly into Resurrection Bay. VFR for the Panhandle from Yakutat on down, but marginal VFR along the central and south coast. Passes, Anatuvik. Mostly IFR tomorrow, as will Adigan be IFR. Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, both entrances. Rainy, marginal at times. And windy, marginal VFR with Isabel, marginal as well. Mostly VFR for Mentasta for the day Monday. Tanita looking good as well. Monday morning through the afternoon, VFR there. Portage, marginal VFR. Chilkoot and White, VFR. Freezing levels at the surface, south of St. Matthew Island, right across the Pribilofs, and then down on the north coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Southern Bristol Bay cutting through southern Cook Inlet and just north of the North Gulf coastal areas, and then cutting back across the northern inner channels of the Panhandle, 2,000 feet just to the east side of Kodiak Island and covering the southeast coast. Icing, not too bad tomorrow. Best chance will be southern Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet down across Kodiak Island. Could be some isolated moderate in the shaded area there for the Aleutian Range and the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, maybe even a lesser threat, though, over the western Aleutians. The rest of the state, icing free. And the jet stream, again, strongest winds now south of the forecast area, but there's 70 knots out of the southwest up over the central interior. And pretty light, though, over the Bering Sea. Upper high pressure over the northern Panhandle, keeping winds light there and giving an offshore flow, actually, at the high altitude at 33,000 feet there over the central Panhandle. And then southeast winds, 55 knots blowing across Kodiak Island into the Aleutian Range at 9,000 feet. And again, light for the Panhandle, light southeast along the south coast. East 35 over the northern Bering Sea, and that's about it. 3,000-foot winds, pretty light winds over the southern Bering Sea, northwest 40 knots, far western Aleutians, southeast 50 across Sitkinak Island, and lesser winds over Bristol Bay. Light winds for the Panhandle, much interior Alaska, and for turbulence, considerable moderate turbulence for the southern Kenai Peninsula, on down to Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, lower Yukon River Valley and the Delta, and St. Lawrence Island. And after the break, I'll be back with marine forecasts.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the earth and grows our food. While the sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the sun doesn't stay at the sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
The marine forecast for the south coast of the Panhandle. Gale warnings for Monday. East winds 35 knots, sea 16 feet. Small craft advisories on the north coast there. East winds 30 knots with 13-foot seas. And for Lynn Canal, north winds 20 knots with higher gusts. Stevens Passage, northeast at 20. And Clarence Strait, southeast at 20 knots with 5-foot seas. And for the next day, Tuesday, we've got southeast winds 30 knots in the forecast for the south coast of the Panhandle, seas at about 13 feet. And for the north coast, east winds 15 to 25 knots, 10-foot seas there. Small craft advisories in Lynn Canal, north winds 25 knots. Stevens Passage, winds out of the north at 20 knots, and southeast winds at 20 for Clarence Strait. For Prince William Sound Monday, light northeast winds at 10 knots, seas down to 2 feet. And northern Cook Inlet, northeast at 15 knots, but gale warnings for southern Cook Inlet, northeast winds 35 knots. And Kamishak Bay, gale warnings also for northeast winds at 40 knots. Barren Islands, winds east 35 knots. And for the North Gulf Coast, east winds 20 to 25 knots, seas 10 to 12 feet. And for the day on Tuesday, North Gulf Coast, east winds 30 knots. Prince William Sound, winds northeast at 15 knots. And north winds 15 knots, northern Cook Inlet. And for southern Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, winds will be northeast at 30 knots. And the Barren Islands, looking at a northeast wind at 25 knots. For Kodiak Island Monday, gale warnings, east-northeast winds 35 to 40 knots. And for the Alaska Peninsula, north to northeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Winds northeast 30 knots for Bristol Bay. And then winds really lighten up in these areas on Tuesday. Kodiak Island, northeast 15 to 20 knots. And the Alaska Peninsula, variable to northeast 10 to 15 knots. And light east winds at 10 knots for Bristol Bay, with the seas subsiding to 3 feet. Eastern Aleutians on Monday, north to northeast winds 10 to 20 knots. Light variable winds really laying down in the central Aleutians there. Light and variable at 10 knots and seas 6 to 10 feet. And for the western Aleutians, west-northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. And for Tuesday, Kiska to Shemya, gale warnings, west winds picking up to 45 knots. Amchitka Island, northwest at 35 knots. Adak and Atka, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Eastern Aleutians, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. And for the southwest coast on Monday, brisk wind advisories, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots, northeast 25 for St. Matthew Island. And for the Pribilofs, winds will be northeast at 25 knots. St. Matthew Island, brisk wind advisories, northeast at 25 knots. Norton Sound, north winds at 25 knots. And for Tuesday, brisk wind advisories continue for Norton Sound, northeast at 30 knots there. Gale warnings for St. Lawrence Island, north winds 35 knots. Yukon Delta coast, north at 30 knots, northeast 30 knot winds in the forecast for St. Matthew Island with 11-foot seas. Pribilof, St. Paul and St. George, northwest winds 20 knots, east at 20 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Up along the Arctic coast, mostly north winds tomorrow at 10 to 15 knots, but for the Chukchi Sea, north to northeast winds 20 to 25 knots. And for the day Tuesday, pick the winds up there, all areas. From Wales to Cape Thompson, northeast winds 30 knots, and from Cape Thompson to Cape Beaufort, gale warnings for northeast winds 35 knots. Western Arctic coast, brisk wind advisories for northeast winds 30 knots, 20 knot northeast winds for the central coast, then brisk wind advisories for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast for east-northeast winds at 25 knots. For tonight, chance of snow, try it again here, moves across south central Alaska, Cook Inlet, as well as the Susitna-Manuska Valley and Kodiak Island. Definitely some moisture moving in there from the east and northeast, and form of rain or snow, and some snow showers possibly spilling into Bristol Bay, with upper level low still over the northern interior there, but lifting out slowly. I'll keep it mostly cloudy with areas of light snow and snow showers from the Arctic coast all the way down to the Yukon River. Weak front out over the eastern Aleutians for some moisture there. Stays dry over the northern panhandle with some clouds down to the south. And a pretty dry day for the southeast coast coming up on Monday with sunshine possible extending right up into the Copper River Basin. A trough in the interior along the Yukon River keeps snow showers in that area, as well as the southwest part of the state in Bristol Bay.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.